pianist teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach the burlesque in G major from the notebook for Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This might have been composed by his father, Leopold Mozart, or by another composer, we're not sure, but it is from that notebook, and it sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson, and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. This is such a great teaching piece for many reasons. To that end, it does show up in some beginner piano methods as well as several intermediate repertoire series, and I do include it on my Method to Masterworks resource. Method to Masterworks is a spreadsheet that lists out historical pieces that are in beginning method series and then lines them up with what intermediate series books you can find them in, and it comes along with an explanatory video. So I would love for you to check that out. Just click the link in the description of this video. I think many of the things that we can work on with our students in this piece are technical. There are a few conceptual things, like it's in G major, which our students should be familiar with at this point, but it's a very good G major piece. It's using, scale-like passages and a lot of dominant to tonic movement. It's great for 16th note concepts. This could be one of the first pieces that your student plays using 16th note patterns. Incidentally, I just recorded a video recently about the Burgmüller Arabesque, which is another early 16th note pattern piece. So click up there in the corner to find that one. But this one only has the 16th notes that are just in sets of 4, 1 E and a 2 E and a, or the 8th to 16th note combination, 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. And it's very consistent in the way that it uses those rhythms. So for that reason, it's a really good study in this, and it's one way to get your students feeling very comfortable with those rhythmic patterns because they do them over and over again, and it's the same thing repeated. The other great teaching point in this piece is the broken octaves in the left hand. For many students at a late elementary, early intermediate level, children who start at a young age, they're still not going to be able to do a lot of blocked octaves. And so a piece like this really gets them comfortable with the shape of an octave as well as the technique required to bounce the entire time on all of these broken octaves. So let's start with that. The way I would teach this after we understand that it's in G major and the student knows what it's supposed to sound like because they've heard me demonstrate it, would be to play only the lower note of the octaves with my left hand pinky and play that line just bouncing around with finger 5. And then that pattern is just repeated multiple times, or just part of it is used. So I would challenge my student to memorize that pattern and then see if they can do it without looking. Can they feel the third? And then more difficult would be, can they feel the fourth? And then come right back. Part of doing a lot of good piano practice is just building patterns and feelings of intervals into your hands, knowing the keyboard topography without looking at it. And I know a lot of amateur students struggle with that. So this is a great piece for trying to get away from staring at your fingers and feeling those patterns. Professional pianists don't look at their hands very much. We can all look up at a piece of music and sight read without looking down, with the rare exception of a large leap or something we need to find on the keyboard. So once that lower note pattern is done, then I would talk about bouncing the octaves. This should be a detached articulation. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart lived squarely within what we call the classical era, that second half of the 18th century. But his father, Leopold, would have been a musician in the Baroque period, and he would have been compiling these notebooks, early on in that classical time period. So many of the pieces that he includes have a very significant Baroque flavor to them, a little bit more polyphonic. Some of the Baroque court dances are included. To that end, this left hand should be detached and just bouncing around. even just a little bit of wrist rotation, but more importantly, I'm thinking of it kind of like a ping pong ball or table tennis ball that's just bouncing from side to side with no stops. You can also liken that to an arc or a rainbow or something like that. What we don't want is to play the first note, find the second one, stop, and then play it, and then, repeat that pattern on each note. The analogy of the ping pong ball helps because no ping pong ball stops midair and then drops onto the other side. It's a constant movement. So this is a place for your student to do a lot of hand separate practice to build in that muscle memory of what that octave span is. And that won't happen automatically the first few times. They're going to have to really learn to feel how that feels and then get the feeling of that detached bouncing. If for some reason your student is resistant to this feeling detached, I would liken this to a Baroque cellist playing a bass line. And you can pull up videos of Baroque ensembles and highlight a Baroque player, with that short bow, yum, 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 yum. That is how they play pieces with this. That's how they articulate bass lines. So the right hand also will naturally detach because there's so many repeated notes. You can play the 16th notes, smoothly. But then you have to play staccato or detach before the repeated notes. And that actually really helps this rhythmic pattern of 1 and a 2, and it helps it happen naturally. Most of my students, because we do just a little bit of rhythmic practice to introduce this, and because of the repeated notes, they do not actually struggle with the rhythm in this. They might struggle with a steady tempo, but that's not the same as struggling with doing the rhythmic patterns correctly. Those bouncing right hand notes and that sequenced pattern going up and down is part of the burlesque nature of this piece. A burlesque is a grotesque or exaggerated theatrical form that's supposed to be mocking and funny. So burlesque and music should have a joking mood or slightly, sarcastic or snarky kind of feel. And I think this piece really exemplifies that really well. It's partly all the bouncing in the left hand. Feels a little bit clownish, like how much you're bouncing around. It's also the dynamics. We have all these echoes in this piece. Maybe it's this, big clown who's over-exaggerating his movements coming in at the beginning. And then a more refined clown in measure 4. And there's more echoes after that. Because this is so repetitive, we are going to encourage our students just to memorize these patterns because that will allow them to deal with the technique. You do have to look down at this level and see what you're doing. And then as you memorize it, as you become more comfortable and you've really built in that span and that muscle memory of jumping with those octaves, then you can start to look less and less. The truth is you can't look in two places at once. So if your student is struggling, help them figure out what are the things they actually need to look at, such as the jump down to the low D and then back up to G. This is very rhythmic. We already talked about the 16th note patterns and the detached octaves in the left hand. It is important to note that it starts on a pickup. It starts on beat 2 and travels to beat 1. 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a 1. 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a 1. And I do think students sometimes struggle with that. They feel the accent on beat 2 because it starts on beat 2 and it so naturally happens that way. But that's something to talk about with your student. Perhaps get up and move around your studio or do some counting 2, 1, 2, 1. But above all, encourage them to play this with abandon, with humor, so that it can really sound fun and have the character of the burlesque as well as be accurate in building that technique. Incidentally, I do have another video about a Leopold Mozart piece, the Minuet in F major, which has a couple of blocked octaves. So if you click right up there, you should be able to find that, as well as links to editions that I recommend for this book and my Method to Masterworks resource as well. I hope that gives you a few ideas for teaching this piece as well as many others. I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.